All right, here we go, ladies and gentlemen. Week 18 of Bet the Birds. Eliot against the spread.
Oh, there we go, man.
8-6-2.
Man, much like the Eagles, a hot start to the season, cooled off towards the end there. Betting on the Eagles has not worked out well the last 5 weeks. But you know what? I think this week moving forward, it will be much better.
Well, yeah, they haven't covered a spread, since the Chiefs game.
Yep.
That's the last time the Eagles covered. But you're doing pretty well. 8-6-2. You assured yourself last week by taking the Cardinals to have a above 500 record.
Mm-hmm.
And we're headed into the last week of the season. We're going to MetLife Stadium. The spread is 5.5. Eliot, how are you going to bet the Birds this weekend?
An interesting line in this one. I know that the Giants and Eagles game was close last time, but you would think an Eagles team that does have something to play for, they could still be the 2 seed, still win the division, versus a Giants team that has nothing to play for. You would think the line would be bigger. So I think it's a bit of a worrisome line to bet on, but I do think I'll take the Eagles in this one. I think they're going to play their starters. I think they're going to play to win. The feeling I get from being at the NovaCare this week is that they want a really good performance this week. I don't think they're kind of punting towards the playoffs. They want to go to MetLife and have a good showing. And I think they need it. Like, this is a team that needs some confidence back, some team that needs to get their swagger back a little bit. And I think going to MetLife will give them an opportunity to do that. So I think you're going to see a fired up Eagles team. I think you're going to see a team that really knows they need a good performance. And if they are that team, then they'll cover this spread easily because they dominated the Giants in the last game. They just had 2 or 3 plays that didn't go their way. We're pretty unlucky, and because of that, the score was closer. So Sirianni has always dominated Dable. I think he'll do it again. I'll take the Eagles to cover the spread.
Well, you mentioned, the hot bet, the hot topic this week is whether or not we should be resting any starters going into this game. You kind of already just said you don't think they are going to rest anybody. Should we be resting people or what do you think?
So I think it's an interesting question on whether or not they should be resting the starters versus the Giants, because let's be honest, this team has handled player safety and player injuries well, really since Howie's been here, but especially over these last few years. They're very deep into sports science. We have this issue or debate in training camp all the time. Should they be hitting? Should they be practicing more? And what happens? They're always one of the healthiest teams in the league. And going into this game, they should have, I believe, 21 of 22 starters there, or 20 of 22. They have a lot of guys still healthy. So there is an argument for health. But ultimately, this team needs to get back on the right track. They need to get going again. They need a good performance. And the Giants can be that team. So I understand on that MetLife turf, if you didn't want to play them, like, I get it. I would understand the risk. But ultimately, the benefit of going out there, putting up 30-plus points, the defense having a better day tackling, I think can be really good for this offense. So if that is what they do, and I think that's what they will do, I think playing the starters is the right call.
Now, people are also saying they might be doing a little bit of scoreboard watching. So say come halftime, the Cowboys have this game almost out of reach against Washington.
Yeah.
Do you think then you might want to sit these guys a little bit, or like you said, you want to just, end the season on a good note, put up 30, blow out the Giants, and end the season on a good note?
Well, I think we can first say a fun parlay for Sunday would definitely be Eagles money line and Dallas money line. Washington money line. That certainly would be the everything works out parlay for you in that game. And I think it's possible. Like, Dallas went to Washington last year and lost a game that they had to win in Washington by 20 points. Now, they weren't as heavily favored as they are in this one, and Washington was better than they were last year. But ultimately, Dallas is a team that chokes in big moments and can't play on the road. So I would not rule out Dallas losing that game on Sunday. But to your point, if Dallas does get a big lead and the Eagles are playing well, let's say they're up 17-3 at halftime or something like that. At that point, then I think you do pull the starters, because the real purpose, while you want to get a win and you want to play well, is mostly for the starters to feel productive. And if they win 17-3 and then you put Mariota in there and you lose, it really doesn't matter that much. So ultimately, I think the Eagles, that's what they'll do. And I think with the Dallas thing, like, don't rule it out. Just don't rule it out. It's not likely, but I still think there's a chance Dallas loses on Sunday to Washington.
I think with all you're saying, the safe bet might be Eagles first half spread at 9-3.5. That way, like you're saying, they should be fired up. They should be wanting to handle their business and then maybe come in at halftime and then take a look at that score. So 3.5 points really is not a lot. Like
Well,
you're
and the
saying,
tough thing
17-3
Yep, and the tough
halftime
thing to
lead.
your point is if you're gonna bet player props on this, you don't know if they're gonna play the whole game. Now, maybe those will be reflected in the player props, but one thing, you could bet unders on these things because if you think they're gonna pull them, you hit that. But the other part to your thing is I do think the first half spread will be good for the Eagles, even the first quarter spread. Like I think this team is really gonna come out fired up and ready to go. That's a sense I get being in the locker room this week. Jordan Mailata said they want to get back to playing Eagles football. I think going into this, they're going to come out there with the right attitude. Now, if they play poorly, we'll see how things go. But I think they're going to come out really feeling confident in this. So the first quarter spread, I think, could be a good bet. The first half spread, as you mentioned, could be a good bet. And maybe some under on the player props, because if they pull these guys early, obviously they're unlikely to hit them.
Absolutely. So what's the likelihood we get Slay back for the playoffs?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I think from an injury perspective, this team's actually doing pretty well. I don't think Devontae Smith is going to play this Sunday against the Giants. I saw him in the locker room earlier this week. Seemed in good spirits, no limp, no wrap on his ankle, no crutches, no boot, anything like that. He actually joked that McDonald's makes him healthy and heal quicker. So he's in good spirits. Slay also in good spirits. He said there was a shot that he would play this Sunday against the Giants. Didn't practice on Friday, so I'm thinking he's not going to be active. But I think for the playoffs, you're going to have Slay back. You're going to have Devontae back. Maddox will be there. I think Cunningham will be there. So really, when you look at this team, as I mentioned before, of the 22 starters, they're going to have almost all 22 of them because Byard obviously wasn't a starter at the beginning of the year, but now he is. Nakobe really wasn't a starter because he only played one game. The majority of guys that have played the snaps this year will be there for the playoffs. So for the second year in a row, they do enter the playoffs pretty healthy.
That's always a good thing. That's what we need. We need some positive trends. A.J. Brown, he spoke to the media finally after a hiatus. Any reaction to his interaction with the media this week?
I think it could have been the turning point of the season. I really think that when you look at what was ailing this team, yes, the defense needs to play better. Absolutely. They have to stop with the sloppy penalties. No question about it. But one of the biggest issues with this team was just the tension and the pressure. Like the temperature was high on this team. Fans were mad. Players were mad. Coaches feel like things weren't going the way they wanted. Like ultimately, things were not going well with the Eagles. I think what AJ did by standing at his locker and giving that press conference is just allow everybody to take a deep breath. Lower the temperature. Now you can sit there and say AJ's not mad at the coaches. He's not talking to the media. He's in a better space. So ultimately what I think that did, and they have to back it up on Sunday, but it helped with the vibes of the team. And this team has a ton of talent. Like they are not the 1-4 team that they've been over the last 5 games. They're playing better than that indicates, and they have way better talent than that indicates. What was hurting them was just, I think, the pressure of the moment. I think the long run from the Super Bowl, like they just needed a fresh breath. And I think AJ going out and doing that gave them kind of renewed energy and a renewed belief of, okay, like things aren't as bad as maybe we once thought, or things aren't as bad as the public's saying. And we can do it on Sunday. They go out there and play really well. I think the players believe they can go on a run.
Boy, do we need it. Speaking of talent, this week, the NFL Pro Bowl selections came out.
Yeah.
Shockingly, Matthew Stafford has been chosen over Jalen Hurts for the Pro Bowl. Could this be some motivation for Hurts heading into the playoffs?
Well, a month ago, Jalen was going to be NFL MVP, probably all pro, and in the Pro Bowl. And things certainly have changed since there. And let's not sugarcoat it. Like Jalen has had a part in the fact that this team has fallen the way that they have. He's been okay. He hasn't been special. I think Jalen overall this year is probably not what you wanted or what you were expecting to get, but he deserves to be in there over Matthew Stafford. Like he has more yards, more touchdowns, a better record. He beat him head to head. He's going to be a higher seed than Matthew Stafford is. To me, this feels like recency bias. Yes, Jalen has fallen off over the last month, and Matthew Stafford's playing well. To his credit, he's playing very well. But on the year, you would rather have Jalen Hurts at quarterback than Matthew Stafford to me. So I do think Jalen should have got in, but it just speaks to how much things have fallen over this past month that we're even having this conversation.
Now, I saw you post earlier today on Instagram. You were at practice.
Mm-hmm.
Howie Roseman spent some time talking to Jordan Davis.
Mm-hmm.
Brian Baldinger was in the media this week saying that Jordan Davis is just absolutely out of shape. And he's kind of been more or less worthless, when it comes to rushing the passer. What are our takes on this draft pick and where that stands right now
Yeah.
for Jordan Davis and his future with the Eagles?
So I was not high on the Jordan Davis pick when they drafted him because he was not a pass rusher at Georgia. He didn't play on third down at Georgia. But I also think there is logic to what they did. When you draft an ultra athletic defensive lineman, you draft him 10 times, you're going to end up with 5 or 6 elite players because the defensive line is a very important position and he plays an important position along the line. Now, I think Jordan Davis earlier in the year was playing much better. He was doing better against the run. He was doing better against the quarterback. But what you're seeing over this past month is he is just not a pass rusher. It doesn't mean he can't get there, but he wasn't one at Georgia. He wasn't one last year. And ultimately, he really hasn't been one this year. So I know there's a lot of talk about what shape he's in. And I'm sure as the months get colder, it is probably harder for him to stay in shape. But I think he's working hard. I don't think this is a matter of work ethic. I think this is a matter of they needed him to develop as a pass rusher, and he has not done that yet. So he's playing a lot of snaps. He has to be out there a lot in situations they probably don't want him to be because other players aren't playing well. But until Jordan Davis becomes a consistent pass rusher, he will not be worth the pick that they used on him.
Whew. Man, oh man. Eliot, give us some hope with the Eagles heading into the playoffs. Where is the silver lining here?
So I think there's a lot more silver lining than people want to admit. And I will say I've been higher on the team than most. And over the last month, it's made me look bad. But you know what? I'm not going to let 1 month of football change my mind on the structure of this team and the foundation of it. And the foundation of the Eagles are a great head coach and a great quarterback. Both have to play and coach better than they are right now. But if you look at what wins football games and what wins in the playoffs, it's offensive line, defensive line, quarterback, and coaching. And they can have all those things at an elite level. Jalen, when he steps on the field in the NFC playoffs, can be the best quarterback in that conference. The offensive line can be the best the best offensive line in that conference. The defensive line, I know the results are not there. They can be the best defensive line in the conference. So they have all the pieces to make a run. They can go to Tampa Bay or Atlanta or New Orleans and win that first game. San Francisco is going to be tough, but you were going to have to do that whether it was the second round or the third round more than likely. So the team has to play better, but I think the scores also, they were up big on Arizona. They were up big on New York. They were up big on Seattle. Like these are games where they are putting good football together and they're not finishing. So if they can just play 20% better than they are, they will look a lot more like that team that we saw earlier in the year than the team that suddenly no one seems to have any belief can make a playoff run.
Who's the biggest letdown this season for the Eagles? Do you have somebody in mind?
Yeah, I think it's obvious. I think the biggest letdown is Jalen Hurts. Like Jalen Hurts was paid $250 million. Jalen Hurts is supposed to be the best quarterback in the NFC. He's supposed to be a top 3 quarterback in the NFL. And for stretches this season, he has been. There's no question about it. That performance against Buffalo was great. He's had really good games. He's a big part of the reason they got out to 10-1. But ultimately, they have needed him to put the Superman cape on over the past month, and he's not been there to do it. Against Buffalo, we saw when he's playing at his best, he can outduel any team. But over the last month, the offense, while still playing, I think, at a higher level than people want to say, he has, I believe, 4 turnovers in the last 3 games. Maybe not all his fault, but on the season, he's turned it over way more than expected. Every week we talk here about this matchup, that matchup. The bottom line truth always about football is you are as good as your quarterback. So he's not a bad quarterback. They're 11-4 or 11-5. He's still one of the top 10 quarterbacks in the league, but he was supposed to be a top 3 quarterback this year, and he has not been that. So while you can certainly look at the defensive line and other positions, they're just not as impactful as the fact that Jalen has not been what they thought they were going to get this season.
Who's been the biggest bright spot for this team this season?
Man, it's tough to think of a bright spot right now, but I would have to say DeAndre Swift. They traded, I think it was a 4th rounder to get him. He's in the Pro Bowl for the first time, has over 1,000 yards for the first time. And I still think there has been moments where he's left some plays there to be had. He does still like to bump it outside a little more than maybe he should. But ultimately, he's proven to be a dynamic player. He's helped carry them to a few wins. You look at Minnesota, Tampa Bay. He's had some really big games against the Giants. He had a big second half when they needed him. So I would say that for what they invested in him to what they've gotten, I think he's probably been the biggest surprise, or the most pleasant surprise, I should say, this season.
Real quick, is he going to be back next year?
I think he will be. Yeah, I think he wants to be here. I don't think he'll get a huge deal in free agency. And I think Howie ultimately can make it work. So I do think he'll be back. Yeah.
All right, who should we be rooting for this weekend? You got the Bucks playing the Panthers. You got the Saints and the Falcons. Out of those three teams, who do you think the Eagles match up with? Who do you think the Eagles match up with the best?
So I think there's a very, very clear-cut order here for the Eagles. First, you want Atlanta. They don't have a good quarterback. They don't have a good home field advantage. They're not a very good team. They don't have a great head coach. There are not many things about Atlanta that worry you. If you have to go to Atlanta and you're the Eagles, I think that's a very, very winnable game. And also, it's an unfamiliar opponent. The downside to playing the Bucks is you've already gone there, you've already played them, and you handled them pretty easily. And I know there's confidence to come from that, but it's tough to beat a team twice in the same year. And the Bucks have already seen your best game plan against what they do. Very different teams. I get that. It was much earlier in the year, but I would go Falcons are the clear-cut number one opponent you want to play if you're the Eagles. After that, I would probably go with the Bucks just because, Baker's dealing with a bit of an injury. You did beat him already and not a great home field advantage there either. For me, the team I don't want to play if I'm the Eagles is the Saints. It feels like they always struggle in New Orleans. The Saints have a great home field advantage. They have a pretty good defense. Derek Carr is someone I will never be able to kick. We'll be doing this in 10 years, and I'll be saying Derek Carr has some potential. But they have good skill players. Alvin Kamara can be a matchup issue the same way that Christian McCaffrey can be, and we've seen the Eagles struggle with those type of players. So I would go Atlanta number 1, Tampa 2, and then New Orleans number 3.
All right, Eliot. For this season to not be labeled as a failure, how far do the Birds need to go in the playoffs?
If they can win their first game, you have to win the first game. No question about it. You lose the first game, and it's a very different offseason discussion. But to me, the season comes down to this. Can you go to San Francisco and be competitive? If they go to San Francisco and they lose the game, but it's very close, the defense plays well, the offense is up and down the field, and they lose, I think you can view this as a successful season. Now, there are certainly things that are going to be concerning, like Jalen wasn't the player you thought. Is the coaching staff really what everyone thinks? Like, there's going to be big picture concerns, but there is no shame to me in going to San Francisco and losing. Like, you'd prefer that to be in the NFC Championship game, but the cards fell where they did, and they deserve blame for blowing it and making it so this is the case. But if you can go to San Francisco and be competitive and still end the season with 11 or 12 wins, whatever it will be, a playoff win, I think that's a successful year coming off the Super Bowl loss.
Well, Eliot, that's all I got for you. Week 18 of Bet the Birds is in the books. Next week, we got playoff football.
Playoff edition, yes. Can't wait.
Playoff edition. That'll feel good to really hit a reset on this season. I know that the Eagles really need it. But hopefully you can get to 9-6-2 against the spread. This weekend you're taking the Birds, laying the 5.5. 9-6-2, man. That's professional level.
I mean, look, the Eagles blew it. Let's be honest. Like the Cardinals, they were up big in that game. They were up big in the Giants game. So I'm not taking blame for this. But I'll say this: one of my favorite bets right now, the Eagles plus 1,400 to win the Super Bowl. It's the best odds you're going to get them at. And at the end of the day, this is still one of the best teams in the NFL when they play their best game. So I know we'll be doing playoff edition next time. My guess is there'll be a lot more picking of the Eagles moving forward. But I think plus 1,400 to win the Super Bowl is a good bet there.
I love it. I love it, Eliot. All right, that's it for Bet the Birds Week 18. We'll see you next week, Eliot.
Sounds good. Talk to you next week, man.